BroadwayCon, and welcome to our panel on expanding producing. We're so excited to have you today. My name is Olivia Jones, and I'll be facilitating. And let's go ahead and get started by introducing ourselves. And after you share your names and your pronouns, if you'd also like to share your relationship to producing. So let's start with Heather.
Hi, everyone. My name is Heather Shields. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a general manager and a producer. My Broadway credits are Bandstand and A Christmas Carol from last year or 2 years ago, and fairly new to the scene in relative terms and just thrilled to be here. So thank you.
Awesome. Let's pass it on to Rashad.
Hi everyone, I'm Rashad Chambers, he, him, and I am a commercial producer.
And Erica.
Thanks, Olivia. I'm Erica Rothstein. I use she, her pronouns. I too work as a commercial producer and also as a talent manager. So often my producing is tied to the work I do as a manager for those clients.
Awesome. Cynthia.
Hi everyone, I'm Cynthia J. Tong. My pronouns are she, her, and I work in commercial producing and also outside of it, doing producing for a lot of other organizations. And currently I'm the associate producer at Tom Curtihe Productions.
Awesome. And let's finish with Rob.
Hi everybody, my name is Rob Lakey. I'm a creative producer by way of dance and puppetry. I work with the National Theater America Producing Office in New York. I also work with Amara Isaacs and her production company, Octopus Theatricals.
Awesome. We've got so many wonderful folks in this room, and I'd like to take a moment for us just to talk about the groups that we're representing. So we have the Business of Broadway and the Industry Standard Group. And so let's talk a little bit about the Business of Broadway. Tell us what that is, how that got started, and the type of work that you're doing.
Heather, I'll start if that's okay with you. So Heather and I are two of the four co-founders of the Business of Broadway. Our other partners are Rachel Sussman and Dana Lerner. And it is a business that we created with the desire to democratize knowledge about how commercial producing works. Frankly, it started largely by virtue of the work that we do with artists and realizing just how little about the actual business side of the business and how and why decisions are made that directly impact artists and their work, how much of the actual reasoning behind those decisions and the actual factors that go into those decisions are ever communicated between producers and artists. And so A, we felt that artists deserve to have access to that knowledge, and B, we kind of wanted to create, to help create a new paradigm for collaboration, one that's built on greater transparency and greater sort of two-way conversation about the decisions that are made. And part of what we have also found as the business has been able to grow in sort of ways we hadn't expected through Zoom, through like the transition to offering classes online, which wasn't something we actually expected to do, is that it's also become a place where we can sort of share the knowledge we have had the privilege of amassing. We are four white women. And create a space where sort of a shared foundation of knowledge of how things have historically operated can be a really fertile ground for having conversations about how we can change how things have historically operated in the hopes of finding new models that operate better in all ways, both financially, but especially from a perspective of access and equity and inclusion. Heather, is there anything you want to add to that?
Not at all. That was perfect.
That's incredible work. I feel like even having an MFA in arts leadership, we didn't really talk about how the sausage gets made, the production element. We spent a lot of time talking about organizational structures and things like that. So I love that you're working on disseminating that information. And I'd love to hear more about the Industry Standard Group. Tell us about the work that you're doing, how you got started, all of those wonderful things.
Sure, I'll go ahead. So the Industry Standard Group is a collective of 8 commercial producers. We all have various trajectories how we got into these rooms. It's founded on about a year ago through these conversations, basically when I transitioned over to creative producing and sort of experiencing being the only self-identified BIPOC individual in many, many rooms. And the arts is something that we've all been used to as self-identified BIPOC individuals, but sort of seeing it in the commercial producing rooms, realizing the impact that it makes to have representation in those rooms really became at the forefront of these conversations in the last year. And so just in a very organic, but also intentional way, we gathered the 8 of us together and it sort of formalized last summer into what this group is. And we're basically seeking to increase representation and access while meanwhile disrupting the way that commercial theater producing works, but creating access and for BIPOC identified individuals into commercial theater producing, particularly in New York and on Broadway.
Yeah, I'll also just add that the way that commercial producing works is pretty unique and has a lot to do with the investor and commercial investor pool and the producer pool. And so we are, in practicality, kind of a twofold organization. We are doing advocacy work, and then we are also practically creating a fund in which we will be allowing members to come in, BIPOC members specifically, to come in and invest in our organization, and then that will in turn invest in Broadway. And so we're bringing people in that way, which is a way that many people actually come into commercial producing, but that has not really been talked about until more recently. So we're really trying to create access points through that.
I'll just add that to echo onto all those things, one of the big sort of problems right now is that there isn't a lot of access. And so we're hoping to be able to create that access to be able to ultimately have more BIPOC producers and investors in the Broadway scene. Right now, there are very, very few BIPOC producers, specifically lead producers. And so we want to be able to sort of create those access points at lower thresholds, be able to give information to educate people how to get into investing and producing, what the world entails, and just how we can have a more diverse pool of people who are operating in the space. And I also just want to acknowledge that, Rob, Cynthia, and I are 3 of the 8 members, as we mentioned. And so I just wanted to acknowledge the other 5 members: Miranda Go, Adam Hindman, Tony Israel, Sammy Lopez, and Ronnie Panoy.
Thank you for lifting up those folks who aren't in the space today from both institutions and organizations. I have so many questions. So I'll start at the industry standard group. The concept of investing is sometimes really unfamiliar to folks. And so how have you been sort of demystifying that and bringing folks in, where sometimes it seems a little bit daunting, like I don't have X amount of money, so I can't be an investor, or I don't have these fiscal resources, or my friends and my family aren't particularly wealthy, I can't be a producer. How have you been demystifying that and breaking down those boundaries for the folks that you've been working and collaborating with?
I can start. So one of the things that most people may know or may not know is that to invest on Broadway is usually a minimum of $25,000. And that's what they term as an accredited investor, which there are various guidelines from the SEC that dictate what an accredited investor is. The rules have changed a bit, but some of the criteria has been, you had to make at least $200,000 a year as an individual, or $300,000 as a couple, or have $1 million in assets that doesn't include your primary residence. So it's sort of self-policing, but you're supposed to check one of those boxes. What we're trying to do is create a space to be able to have both accredited and non-accredited investors be able to join the fund. And the non-accredited investors can come in at a much, much lower threshold. So it's not as daunting. So you could be a member and have the same sort of voting power and access as an accredited investor and still be able to get into the game. And we're also trying to open it up to traditional investors, but also people who have sort of devoted their lives to being in this industry, whether they are a stage manager, a company manager, or an actor, and be able to also allow them to have a little bit of piece of the pie by being members of the group.
And I'll also add that because of the 8 of us have had those uh, various trajectories into how we've gotten into those rooms, we are very keen on sharing our knowledge as individual producers to be able to have a large base of information and data moving forward in how commercial theater producing works. Because, and I'm sure as well as the Business of Broadway group, trying to, the word is really demystify, because there are so many ways that shows do get produced, and anyone that has experience producing 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it's different than what we're, moving forward now. So in the flexibility of what this business is in terms of the actual logistics, the shared knowledge is so important. So we hope to partner with groups like the Business of Broadway. Rashad and Miranda in our group founded the Theater Producers of Color, TPOC group, which seeks to educate BIPOC individuals with commercial theater producing as well. And we want to partner with those groups as well as other educational institutions to be able to really share the knowledge of what commercial theater producing has been and what it potentially can become.
Absolutely. That's amazing. I love that we're focusing on education in a variety of ways, and especially that knowledge sharing, where I feel like some of that has been knowledge hoarding and power hoarding for so long in the commercial theater industry. And just thinking about education for the Business of Broadway folks, I wonder how you curate your curriculum and how you introduce folks to producing, where there might be a lot of folks listening in today that still quite aren't sure exactly what that means to be a producer, or what's your role, what kind of power do you have in decision making, all those sorts of things. So can you tell us a little bit about how you figure out what sorts of curriculum, and can you give us that brief introduction as to what that is, so that we can have all the folks on the same page in this call?
A brief introduction into what producing actually is. Okay, great. So Erica, do you mind if I take a swing at this one? So as Erica kind of alluded, when we first started this, it was geared towards theater makers of all sorts, not necessarily people that were like, I want to be a producer. The idea was everybody has a stake in this. And so it behooves everybody to understand how it's working, so that we can have a better collaboration as a whole. We are finding, though, that there are a lot of people who take our classes who are like, I've worn a stage manager hat, I've worn a writer's hat, but I actually am a little bit interested in producing. Not so much to take a 14-week course with, that's thousands of dollars with other organizations. And so one of the things that we were very adamant about is that the entry level basic course with us was going to be just a couple hour commitment, very low price point of let's all get on the same page. And we keep that in mind, that people are coming to us, some people with exactly zero knowledge, or maybe they just consider themselves a fan of theater, so they have no idea how the economic model or the behind the scenes stuff works. And so we really do start from square one, where we're like, the producer is the CEO, and every single show is a startup. Very basically, you are at the end of the day responsible for all of the decisions that happen below you, and we work from there. And I think that it's really important that and we take people through not only the structure of this startup, of this organization. We take them through, how did we get here? So we start with a playbill, and we talk about all the people that are on it, and then we talk about how we got here. So through the creative development process, and then through the lens of a financial process, and so that at the end, I'm quite proud of our curriculum, to be honest. I think that we take something that is normally taught over the course of weeks and months, and we boil it down to 2.5 hours. Then, if you're like, that was really interesting, I want to get deeper into this, I want to learn about royalty pools, I want to learn about the SEC accreditation standards, I want to learn about all this stuff a little bit more, we offer different one-off classes so that everyone can do a deep dive. I hope I just answered all of your questions, but that was the perspective, that was the angle by which we came to it, and how we are here where we are today.
I love that. I love learning a bit about how you let people into the room and how you put it out there in an easy to understand, inclusive way. And then you sort of dig deeper and deeper and deeper. Where there's a lot of folks, I imagine, that are watching this video who've heard the term producer and are like, I'm interested. And so I'm really glad that they're part of this space and that we're able to share not only how we're approaching this work, but a little bit about what it means to be a part of the producing community. And I'd like to dive into how we're seeing the producing world shift a little bit, or even just having that basic knowledge about the producing world shifting the field, where we see so many studies and articles talking about how many women are producing or working on Broadway, how many BIPOC folks are producing and working on Broadway, and how those numbers are insanely low. And so when you think about the industry for the past few years, how have you seen it progress, and how have those studies assisted you, or movements like We See You, White American Theater, have helped to push that work forward, especially in the past year, where people are, I think, listening a little bit more, whether they're afraid of call out culture or it's from the goodness of their heart, but that folks are making the effort. I feel. How have you seen the industry change in the past year, past 5 years, from your perspectives?
Can I distinguish one thing that Heather said first before we move on to that question? Because I think everything that she said was so on point. But just in case there are some newbies watching that don't know about producing, I would say 100% the producer is a CEO, but I would just distinguish that and say the lead producer is the CEO of the show. And a lot of times it takes a multitude of co-producers in order to make the show happen. And that's where a lot of us get our start as co-producers. And our main responsibility is to raise money. And if you have a good lead producer and you want to hustle, then you can also get a little bit of extra knowledge by being able to attend co-producer meetings or marketing meetings and really get to understand how sort of it all comes together. And then a lot of people work their way up and become lead producers, and then they are literally that CEO who's running the whole show, who's responsible for hiring everyone, but also not only dealing with the business side of the show, but dealing with the creative, working closely with the director on his or her vision for the show, casting, how the design elements are coming together. And so it really is sort of a really big job, but I just wanted to distinguish that because I know a lot of people are like, oh God, I'm not ready to be that CEO yet. There are still other ways for you to be involved with a show and to really get a lot of great experience.
Thank you, Rashad.
Of course.
Thank you for lifting that up.
Yes. And now to answer your question, I'll just start briefly because I don't want to talk too much. I just think that in the past year, it's sort of just given more light to what I'll call a problem, in that, a lot of people haven't been given sort of the access to be able to get into rooms. And we see a lot of statistics coming out about the number of BIPOC producers or women producers and stuff like that. And I think this racial awakening has really just made people more aware, and it's allowed people to just have better and deeper conversations about what inclusion and equity really look like. And I don't think there definitely are problems, and we definitely need to address them, and we definitely need to call out certain things, but I don't think that we need to bully or alienate. I think this is a time for us all to really come together and figure out how we can become solutions to those problems. And by having more inclusion and more diversity within organizations and within productions, I think that's what we are all trying to accomplish. And to be able to say, listen, I don't want to be one of 10 Black Broadway producers. I want there to be 100. I want there to be a space for everyone who maybe is in high school or college to just know that you can have a career in this business outside of being on stage. And what does that look like? If you want to be a lighting designer, if you want to be a stage manager, if you want to be a producer, if you want to be a GM, like that's what I think is happening right now, is to show people, one, it's possible, and two, let's create some tangible, actionable steps to really make a difference.
Thank you, Rashad. That was beautiful. I just wanted to say I'm on the newer side to producing, and I want to make a distinction that we are mostly in this room talking about commercial producing. There's a lot of other kinds of producing, and commercial producing is specifically, for all intents and purposes today, mostly Broadway. So the models we're talking about are very specific to that. And in terms of the Broadway producing model, I don't think that it has been changed drastically in the last, I was talking to my boss the other day, 100 years, and that there's a generation of producers that are starting to come up. Some of us are in this room, and there's many, many outside of this room who have been really thinking about what will producing look like next. And this pandemic has given us an opportunity to really actually accelerate, I think, a lot of the processes and thoughts we've already been having. And I think that's also because producing in the past was not as formalized a career path or job as it has become. And so that's why I think education has been a big part, or growing educational opportunities has been a big part of that. And theater management and producing programs are still rather new, even in the MFA or like college space. And that's because I think a lot of creatives and like genius directors and other people who started to amass a career in the artistic sense sometimes moved over and said, okay, now I'm going to be producing this work and learning that on the go. And instead, we're starting to see a generation of people who are self-identifying, you know, very early on that this is something they want to do. And productions have gotten a lot bigger in terms of budgets and things that need to happen to make a show successful. And so there's so many more roles now, and that's why they've been kind of delineated in all those ways. And marketing and social media and general management and all of these things, company management, are actually all under the producing umbrella in some senses. And the lead producer, as Rashad said, does have a hand in making all of that happen. But there's so many ways into producing. You don't have to find necessarily an assistant producer position, or it doesn't have to be named that way. All of those things are actually under the producing umbrella.
I'm inclined to jump in to build on the sort of agreeing with Cynthia completely about the stagnation that is sort of the default in this business, and building on both Rashad and Cynthia were talking about sort of how do we be agents for that change. And since Olivia, you brought up We See You White American Theater, I will own as a white woman that the conversations that I was having both with myself and with others around racism, white supremacy, anti-racism have shifted after George Floyd's murder, right? Like, I wish that weren't true, but it is, like, as by which I just mean, I wish I was having those conversations already in the depth that I am having them now, but I own that there was a shift for me. And when it comes to the demands that were shared by We See White American Theater, I wish that my peers, that my BIPOC peers had not been so hurt for so long that they needed to express demands in this way. But I see the demands that they shared as a gift, frankly, because we are talking about commercial producing, but just for a small anecdote, I am the board chair of a nonprofit theater company called Cold's Core, an off-Broadway theater company. And that was a tangible, whereas I don't have a show running right now with which to sit down with those demands and figure out point by point how they apply to the work I'm doing in the context of Cold Core. We have a company where we could sit down and point by point work through the demands of We See White American Theater and use those both as ways of rethinking how it is that we do business, opening up new conversations amongst our company of artists and our board. And I just, I am incredibly grateful that in the face of we as white people did not deserve that generosity, and I'm grateful I'm really grateful to the folks who sat down and chose to share in that way.
I feel like those demands really illuminated a lot of opportunities for growth for a lot of spaces, a lot of productions, a lot of nonprofit institutions that still produce quasi-commercial Broadway theater, all of those different things. When you're looking at the field, what sort of opportunities of growth do you identify that that your institutions, that the Business of Broadway and the Industry Standard Group are specifically approaching? Like, what of those opportunities for growth are you tackling today?
I mean, I can speak to a strategy that we've talked about within our group for the industry standard group. And a couple of us occupy those spaces as you were talking about, and what Cynthia had mentioned as well, you know, that we're dealing specifically in a very specific way with commercial theater producing, particularly Broadway and New York, right? But a lot of those institutions, and you even said it earlier when you said quasi-commercial productions for not-for-profit, there's a partnership that happens with how art is created in general, right? And a couple of us are from organizations that sit on that span, that, like the National Theater, for instance, is a non-for-profit commercial or non-for-profit producing entity in the UK, but has stake in commercial theater productions that have come over to Broadway. So there already is, you know, moves towards taking down those silos and de-siloing sort of those how art is created, how stories are told, and how things are actually produced. Because in what we're learning in sort of white supremacy at large is that separation makes it easy for white supremacy to continue. One of the ways that it continues is in separating groups, and our group particularly is looking at how collectively we can regain that that power, again, that leverage as a group, how we can make collective decisions, how we can move forward in true partnership with organizations. And it starts sort of, you know, on our own self-examination as an individual, how you approach your practice as a producer, but then that sort of radiates outward to how you approach with the group, and then how this group then interacts with the other groups. So really, you know, the question is like, how are we moving forward that doesn't reinforce sort of these structures that we've been existing in?
That's a great point, because I think that sometimes some of these demands are enforcing those parameters just with darker people. And so we want to make sure that we avoid that and that we are all growing together. And specifically to answer your question, Olivia, you know, just to expand on what I said earlier, you know, part of our mission is to really be able to grow the numbers. So through access, through disruption, and through just general communication, we're working to just provide that knowledge. You know, you come in and become a member of our organization, that we are going to in turn invest in a commercial production that automatically gives you, maybe as a new person, access to additional co-producers, additional lead producers, additional investors, learning about the process, being able to really dissect offering papers and other literature that comes along with being a producer. So many people don't have access to that information until they're offered a show. And then, you know, as a co-producer, it's then my responsibility to walk a new investor through 60 pages of material, which can be very daunting. So if we can start early and be able to acclimate people into that process, I think it'll really be a game changer to be able to just say, okay, this is what it entails. These are the possibilities. This is what this terminology means. And we can really, really grow the business through those mechanisms.
Yes, yes, yes. I couldn't agree more. I would think, just to your question, Olivia, which was so well asked, with the Business of Broadway, it also comes down to education. And frankly, the We See You What demands, that document that Erica, you know, very accurately described as generous. I believe that there are people who read it and didn't, and probably don't know what all of those demands entail from a practical, logistical, financial standpoint. And so I hope that one of the major objectives of the business, I hope that one of the major achievements of the Business of Broadway is giving people the tools by which to read that document and understand what that actually means. Erica, you know, described sitting down with her core group and saying point by point, how can we address this? And there are practical issues, there are financial issues behind those decisions. And so it's something that I hope we're providing in terms of being able to interpret the document, and then go out and make art with those demands in mind. So I hope that that's something we've been able to achieve.
I just want to add to that as well, that the demands in particular were for the entire industry, and there's sections that are pertaining to unions and Broadway and nonprofits. So it's actually, I think people hear all the time, it's like 61 pages and it can feel very overwhelming. But just like what we are doing, we are tackling, both organizations are tackling a very small part of the industry. And I think that's what all the organizations that have cropped up recently are doing, is they're tackling these different points. And I think what will be most successful, and what I think everyone is aiming to do, is that if we can make small meaningful change in each section of a giant industry, then we'll all be able to move forward together. And that's why partnership has been so key for, I know Business of Broadway is in partnership with other organizations, and we're doing the same thing, because none of us are trying to fix the entire industry. We're just trying to fix a small part and then work with each other to do that. And we always said, if someone else does it differently or better or ahead of us, we'll just jump on that train. So far, we're working on something that has been new. So no one else is doing it yet, but if we hear someone else, we'll be in collaboration with them.
Which frankly, I think in and of itself is part of how we as a new generation of theater makers are changing the way the industry operates, because that is not that kind of sharing of resource and a desire to uplift one another rather than view it all as competitive and me or you. That fundamentally is a shift in how our business is operated.
And I will say too that is something that is so inspiring in these kind of conversations and in our weekly calls that we have for the industry standard group, is that we're coming from a place where we're not operating at holding our knowledge proprietarily, right? And we come from a place of generosity, and we also come from a place of responsibility and accountability. So it is like I was mentioning earlier, where when we think of how we create art and the relationship of art and how it's made commercially in theater, we're taking down not only those like walls between us as partnerships, but what the definition of that means even within our industry. We're bringing, social justice to the table. We're bringing, these things that make us activists. We're also being activists and producers. We're becoming like the ultimate multi-hyphenate, and as producers in this realm, we've all had to operate and be flexible and try to wear so many hats at any given time. But what we're finding, and again, what's so inspiring, is that we're seeing that we don't have to do it on our own, that there is a community that's being created. And the more that we reach out to not only within our own networks, but to other people, other organizations that are doing the aligned work, that I slightly disagree with you, Cynthia. We are trying to change the entire industry. I mean, ultimately, that's the goal, right? That we won't be having to have these conversations 15, 20 years down the line, hopefully sooner, because through these partnerships, we're making real, a measurable change, and that we're inviting people to these tables and these rooms that have never gotten that invitation before, and we're sharing what the profit and what the benefit of all of that is.
That's amazing. I can listen to you speak forever on that, Rob. And thinking about all the folks who are working in collaboration, all of the folks who are taking on this work in these different pockets, I'm also thinking about the folks who've not been doing this work, who have maybe even never thought about doing it, right? This is the way producing is, this is what we do, this is how we've been doing it. How can we fold those folks in, the folks who are holding a lot of this knowledge, the folks who are in that CEO producer role? How can we fold them in, and what sort of action steps can they take to be a part of this work, to be a part of this movement?
I'll just say really quickly that we have found, because we are doing this work at this time, that a lot of people are interested in working with us, like people who have been in the industry for many years and providing those access points. And we are essentially a bridge building organization. So we're hoping to offer people from above, below, around, all fold them in to our organization. And there is an opportunity and a place and a part they can play.
Yeah, I think it just comes down to outreach. You know, there are people who have graciously reached out to us to say, I hear what you're doing. It's amazing. I want to learn more. And they've set up general calls with us. And there are people that we've reached out to say, we want to pick your brain. You want to understand how your model is as a lead producer and how we can maybe either change that or be a part of that. And so it really just comes down to communication, because we all, I think, have the same goal. And so really just communicating and taking those actionable steps to say, this is what we're doing, this is what we want to do to change, and how can we do that together?
Amazing. I have like a million questions. So I have to be specific because we just have about 5 more minutes together. And so I'll move towards this one. So rather than having you address someone who's like an invisible person, someone we don't know, hi, my name is Olivia Jones and I'm interested in producing, but I've literally never thought that I could do it, right? What information do you have for me? What ways can I fold myself in? What advice do you have for someone who's like, I've just never felt like I belonged in that room? How do they get started?
Okay. Oh, Rob, please.
No, go ahead, Heather, go ahead.
We both unmuted at the same time.
Yeah, we did like that game.
So one thing that I think always surprises people when they find out about this industry is what a full ecosystem it truly is, and how many specialties are represented within it. Another thing that I would another nugget of information I would give is just that almost all producers that do not come, in my experience, that do not come to the table independently wealthy or with independent funding, wear other hats, and they come to, and that may be that they're what they do. You know, I introduce myself as a general manager. I make money as a general manager. I don't make money as a producer. I came into general management with a background in, you know, being pre-law in college and studying business and being really good at spreadsheets, not because I was trained as a general manager. There are people who are interested in fashion, and then they get a foot into costume design, and now they're in the door in that way. There are people that there are ways for you to take skills that you already have and start working within the theater industry. If it's graphic desiging, if you build websites, you can work for an advertising agency. So just like finding what you're good at, what you thrive at, and start working within the industry itself, I think is very helpful. From there, I just say producing is a thing that you can do. It took me until only a few years ago to find out that that's and general management at that time is a thing that I can do. It's a thing that's available for me to do. So just the knowledge of it's a thing that you can do, and you can start working in this industry with the skill set that you already bring to the table, is the very, very most first minimal step that I would give.
And I'll tack on to that that's related to sort of the individual's sort of interest, right? And additionally, like, what shows do you love? Like, who's making work that you love, right? Follow what that trajectory of the people that are a part of those teams potentially, and see, you know, and you can do your own individual research, and that information exists out there. But also you might find within that project a person, and a lot of people are willing to have a conversation. I say you don't know if you don't ask, as an artist, and like you have to be relatively driven and tenacious in that sense, and that will get you really far, because a lot of people want to share their knowledge. And, you know, to speak to a question that you mentioned earlier about, you know, to get buy-in for people that are currently in the industry, at this time we are kind of focusing on who automatically is there, who wants that buy-in, and the other people either will come along or not, and they'll do what they do. So in that same vein, if you're starting out as wanting to be a producer, you meet who you're supposed to meet when you're supposed to meet them. You know, there's a lot of sort of what we think of as like luck in this industry, but I also think that when you steer and point your ship in that direction, things that are unexpected happen, and you'll, you know, find the way into this industry, and you'll be like beautifully surprised at sort of what yields. So it's always expect the unexpected, but definitely there's a drive and there's a questioning and a curiosity that people of like mind will follow.
I'll just add really quickly that you might already be producing. A lot of producers don't realize they're producing, and that like I put together dance concerts when I was in college, and I didn't know that was producing. So think about what you've already done. You might actually already be doing it.
Amazing. We have just about a minute left, and I would love for each group to share how folks can connect with you. How can they find you? Where I'm feeling inspired and I want to sign up for whatever all of you are offering. So I know that there's a lot of people in this space that feel the same way.
I'm going to go first to let you guys have the final word. We are, the business is literally called The Business of Broadway. You can find us, that is our website, www.thebusinessofbroadway.com. And we are now on all social media platforms, including our, attempt at TikTok as 30 somethings. And we are at Biz of Bway, B-I-Z, I'm sorry, Biz of Breway. BIZOVBWAY. That is us on all social media handles. And thanks for having us. Did I screw that up, Heather?
BIZOFBWAY. I love you, my friend.
Thank you. I forgot how to spell. on to our colleagues here.
Yeah, we're producers. We don't spell. At the Industry Standard Group, very similarly, you can go online. It's theindustrystandardgroup.com, and all of our social handles, it's TISG_fund. You can find us on Twitter and Insta and Facebook. We're not quite as advanced for our TikTok followers yet, but we're talking about it. We're trying to figure out what that content would look like, but
You got it. I love that. And as we sort of close out, does anyone have a call to action that you would like to leave the room with?
I'll just say communicate. I often feel like there are a lot of people talking and a lot of people not talking to one another. So I think this is really a time for us all to come together, collaborate, and to be able to communicate.
I was going to say something similar, that this business is built on relationships. That won't change. And I think I'm really seeking to work with people who are empathetic and compassionate. And I think that's something we could all bring more of to producing. And so I think hopefully that's where we're going to head.
I hope this isn't too hokey, but this is all, producing is really difficult, and trying to make your dream a reality is really hard. And I have to remind myself all the time that a producer also has to be a dreamer and believe. And so just believe in that dream and keep working towards.
Amazing. These are beautiful final words. Erica and Heather, thank you so much for representing the Business of Broadway. Rashad, Cynthia, and Rob, thank you so much for representing the Industry Standard Group. It has been a pleasure to share space with you today, and I appreciate your generosity of spirit in this room, and the inspiration that you're providing the field. And I hope that this brings up an entire new crop of producing individuals. So thank you so much. And thank you to all of the folks at BroadwayCon who have attended this panel today, and have a beautiful, beautiful day.
Thank you.
Thank you. That guy.